we can't really talk about super committees and debt reduction without talking about the debt limits. And you made reference earlier to the burgeoning national debt, and we don't want to become like Greece. And people would argue we're nowhere near Greece's levels yet. How much of a concern is that, and what does Congress do about raising the debt limit?
Well,
which realistically has to be done if you're going to have a balanced budget, doesn't it?
Well, you know what we did in the summer was Senator Amendent and I and others, Senator Lee got together and we decided, well, yeah, you probably do have to raise the debt limit. So we said we'll do it under one condition, and our condition was that there need to be significant cuts, statutory caps, and a balanced budget amendment. And we pushed all of that, and we said we'd give it in exchange to show that we would actually raise the debt ceiling. But just to raise the debt ceiling without conditions, I won't vote for. And I think many conservatives have voted to raise the debt ceiling through the years, and I think it's a mistake because we shouldn't increase the credit we give to government. But I think also default's not a great idea. So I think if you are going to raise your debt ceiling, you have to have severe, significant conditions that restrain government. And I think really we need an amendment. Jefferson said it was one of the mistakes we made with the Constitution is we should have had an amendment on debt or balancing the budget.
So you would support a balanced budget amendment?
I have, and I've been a big proponent of it.
Would you insist that the balanced budget amendment have restrictions in it? And I mean, a couple kinds of, you could have a balanced budget amendment that simply says the budget must be balanced.
Right.
And then and leave it up to Congress to debate how it gets there. There are some balanced budget amendments where people insist that there be caps on spending in them related to GDP. And
well, the one we passed in the, or we didn't pass, but the Republicans supported in the Senate was one that I co-sponsored and worked with Senator Lee on writing. It's the most strict balanced budget amendment that's ever been voted on. Now, unfortunately, the House took the opposite approach. They voted on one that had no restrictions, and they still didn't win, which we advised them was a bad idea because if you're not going to win, at least put out there what you would like to have if you could win. And they got 10 or 15 Democrats who got covered to vote for something very weak. But in the Senate, we had supermajority restrictions on raising taxes, supermajority restrictions on raising the debt ceiling, and that spending had to be a certain percentage of GDP. It's the first time a balanced budget amendment like that has ever been voted on, and it's the most strict, and we got 47 Republicans and no Democrats to vote for it.
So maybe better luck next time.
Well, we keep working on it. I think the American people are way ahead of Congress. And I'm glad we had the vote because if you poll the American people, 75 to 80%, Republicans, Democrats, Independents support a balanced budget amendment. They don't think we're doing a good job. I think it's sort of the corollary to the 9% approval rating we have. The 9 or 10% approval rating, those people probably don't care whether we have a balanced budget amendment. The 90% that disapprove of us think we need more rules because we're not doing a very good job.
It leads into a notion. You talk about a 9% approval rating, and that people, and maybe people in Washington, don't really get what the American people think. There's Lamar Alexander in 1996, I think it was, when he was running for president, talked about cut their pay and send them home, and there was a big term limits movement in the 90s, and which ended up not going anywhere. Do you have a notion, and particularly in looking at some of your colleagues, that you haven't been there very long yet, but some of them have been there a very long time. They become very good at making sure that a lot of what you want to do doesn't happen. Is there a utility to term limits, or at least vote getting rid of people periodically?
Yes, I'm a big fan of term limits and think that we should have term limits. I'd probably vote for any permutation of term limits, but I like 12 years in the House, 12 years in the Senate. We already have 6-year terms, 2 6-year terms, and 6 2-year terms. And I think term limits would be a great idea, and turnover is good. Now, there are exceptions to every rule. There are some people, my dad's been there longer than 12 years, and I think a lot of people would say he's been a good conservative voice, and they're glad they had him for longer. Some people make the argument that the president already has so much power is gravitated away from Congress to the president, that if you term limit Congress, you're going to weaken Congress's power against the presidency, and that has some argument to it. But in the end, I think term limits would be overwhelmingly positive. I don't think there's a monopoly on knowledge. I've met most of the guys up there, men and women. There's no monopoly up there on knowledge that doesn't exist elsewhere in the country. And I think it would be more likely the people who've been there a long time are all in leadership, and they tend to keep things the same, and often there's not a lot of difference between the leadership of one party or the leadership of the other party.